very clear. A limited strike is out. So the military plan now is basically invasion. In sum, my assessment from doing this investigation of the tapes in particular and also some other contemporaneous evidence is that the tapes and the evidence does not show that McNamara was JFK's principal ally in, quote, trying to keep us out of war, unquote. Indeed, Kennedy had no consistent ally. I would say Kennedy stood virtually alone against his ex-com advisors. And he later confided to John Kenneth Galbraith, quote, "You will never know how much bad advice I had." McNamara would later assert to Llewellyn Thompson, known as Tommy Thompson, who was a former ambassador to the Soviet Union. McNamara would later say that Thompson persuaded Kennedy to resolve the crisis through diplomacy, not force. My sense is that this is misleading. My sense is that, in fact, Kennedy, very much on his own, reached that conclusion, and that from an early point, Kennedy was looking for a negotiated settlement. He wanted to find a way to allow Khrushchev to save face, and substantially was alone in doing so. And just a few words about Kennedy then. I find the tapes quite astonishing in this regard. And even if we allow for the possibility that Kennedy, unlike others, or at least many others in the room, knows of the system, knows of the taping system, is aware that this changes how he responds when the tape is playing and so forth. Nevertheless, what those tapes reveal, it seems to me, is a deeply engaged, calmly authoritative commander-in-chief, capable of seeing the situation from his adversary's perspective. Now, I hasten to add parenthetically that one could also be very, very critical of John F. Kennedy for bringing the crisis on in the first place, which is perhaps something we'll have a chance to talk about in the discussion. It's certainly a powerful argument in my book to say that Operation Mongoose, the anti-Castro operation of the Kennedy administration, and the kind of fanatical interest that the Kennedy brothers in particular had in trying to remove Castro is part of what's going on. But in the crisis itself, it seems to me that Kennedy comes out looking extremely good. He moved decisively and creatively. He had, I think, a sense of the vagaries of history. And as a historian, maybe this has special resonance for me. I think that Kennedy had a better sense than his advisors of the vagaries of history. Earlier in the year, as I think many of you know, he had read Barbara Tuchman's The Guns of August, which details how European leaders had stumbled into World War I. He came away so impressed with that book that he often quoted from it. He often urged advisors to go out and read it. And I would say that we can all be, after all, we're still here. We can all be grateful that Kennedy showed restraint. Had somebody else been president in October of 1962, the outcome might well have been very different. And I think it shows, well, it shows lots of things that we can talk about. One is that it shows Kennedy's capacity for empathy, which I think is a critical concept that Jim and Janet have written about, and I hope we can talk about. It also shows, it seems to me, that human agency in this crisis matters a great deal. Personalities matter. It matters who was president. It matters who was the Soviet leader at the time. So those of you who are students in the room, when your professors tell you that it's all about structure, it's all about subterranean forces moving history, don't believe it. In this crisis and in others, human agency, it seems to me, is of great, great importance. And this, in fact, is my second point. My second point this evening is that had another man been president in October of 1962, we could have done worse than to have Robert McNamara in the Oval Office. This may sound contradictory to what I've just said, and in a sense it is. Then again, McNamara is a contradictory figure in history, and his Vietnam record certainly shows this. Kennedy later reportedly said that McNamara was his most valuable advisor during the crisis. If that statement is accurate, the reasons for it have probably been lost to history to a large extent. Obviously, a lot of the deliberations during the 13 days were not recorded. Obviously, a lot of the discussions and the debates occurred when the tapes, the machine was not playing. But even in the existing record, even the record that we do have, I think we see signs of this McNamara that I'm talking about now. Though he was more of a hawk, to use the Vietnam era word, though he was more of a hawk than he later claimed, he showed at certain moments, and especially on October 16 and 17, which I think is important, he showed at certain moments, fleeting moments, that he was capable of seeing the bigger picture, of staking out an independent position, of seeing that the quarantine option was not merely or even primarily military, but was in fact a matter of great political importance. McNamara also showed a wariness about pulling the trigger. He was also, for Kennedy, a kind of buffer between himself, between Kennedy and the Pentagon. This, as you know, if you've seen the movie 13 Days, is a theme, a main theme in that movie, and it shows McNamara, almost, well, to some extent, single-handedly stopping the Pentagon from shooting at the Soviet submarines on the edge of the blockade area. Did it happen this way? Not really. The film, it seems to me, exaggerates by a pretty considerable margin the nature of the civil-military tensions, makes the JCS, the Joint Chiefs, more bloodthirsty than I think they really were. But I think the scene, and you may remember this if you've seen the film, the famous scene involving McNamara coming up in a confrontation with Admiral Anderson, in which he basically dresses down Admiral Anderson, it does get at this larger truth. And I think that's important. So I want to finish with a few words about Vietnam. But my point simply here is that McNamara kept tight control as Secretary of Defense of the ships, of the submarines, of the aircraft, enforcing the quarantine around Cuba. And I think that's important in historical terms. Okay, a couple words about Vietnam, and then I'm going to stop before Janet brings out her hook.